everybody, to Faith 180, the podcast where mental health meets Jesus. I am one of your hosts, Tom Hazelton, and joining me as always is Jordan Hamilton.
I'm here as always, Tom. I'm here as always.
Glad that you're here as always. You're always here every time. You're so regular, and I love it. And that's what I love about you.
Tom, I'm excited for tonight's conversation, but before we get to that, I'm going to get this out of the way. We're giving away Action Bibles. I don't know how many, but we're giving away at least 2. So go check out that on our Facebook and find out how you can win one of these puppies. But yeah, we're giving at least 2 away, and the publisher has given us over 50% off more copies. So praise God for that. And we're going to see how many Action Bibles we can give away. But these things make God really accessible, and they just help put images to otherwise confusing texts. And I myself have read Ruth and then checked it out in the Action Bible, and it made more sense. So if you want to win one of these, go check it out on our socials. Yeah, Tom, are you excited about giving away Action Bibles?
I'm really excited about giving away the Action Bible. For those of you who don't know, the Action Bible is literally stories from the Bible, but in graphic novel form. And the person who illustrated it used to work for Marvel and DC Comics. So it's awesome. And like the illustrations are super cool too. Like you said, reading a story that might be confusing and having a visual to go with it. Yeah, it's incredible. My mom bought me one when I got baptized because she knows I like comic books and she knows I like the Bible. So praise
Your
Mom.
mom's pretty cool. She was my teacher. She's pretty cool. So thank you to anonymous donor number 1 who got us 2 Action Bibles to give away. And we are working on, my goal is 25. I'd like to give away 25 Action Bibles this year and double it next year. So yeah, if you want to get one of these, super cool. Thanks for joining another episode of Faith 180. We got our pal Alex with us. He's
The third
online.
Gingerbeard.
What's up, Alex?
Gingerbeard. I hope this gets clipped or something because I put a lot of thought into this title. Also, with your goal of doubling the Action Bibles next year, I'm going to say take it and double it and give it to the next person.
Oh, you're one of those. I've been watching TikTok again.
Yeah, so 100 Action Bibles next year.
Yeah.
And if that person doesn't want us, 200. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
I see where you're going there. Yeah.
So, Jordan, you alluded that you're excited for this episode. Why is that?
I'm pretty excited. God does this cool thing where people that once in your life reappear in a new one or a new chapter. And this person reappeared in mine, I don't know, a year ago. I don't know, God pointed his finger and said hello, and I was just observant for a year. And then thank you to her for calling me out in a coffee shop one day. We ended up in a conversation that was very cool, and she's joining us tonight. So that's how we got where we are. And I'm excited to learn, first of all, understand, and this is totally new, and it's going to be new for a lot of people, which makes this exciting. So, Tom, tell us more.
So we are joined tonight by Meighan Donaldson. Meighan Donaldson is an executive function coach with a background in education and a passion for helping individuals build the skills they need to thrive. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Classics and English from Dalhousie University and a Bachelor of Secondary Education from the University of New Brunswick. She began her career as a high school teacher, and after her first year in the classroom, she transitioned into coaching and has spent the past 3 years helping both students and adults strengthen their executive functioning skills. From time management to organization to goal setting and emotional regulation, Meighan supports clients in developing practical life skills that foster independence and confidence in everyday life. She also grew up down the road from me, went to school with my wife. Meighan, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to this crazy podcast. I don't know, I guess best friends with Megan's brother. I said to somebody the other day, I think I lived more at your house some summers than I did my own. So here we are, I don't know, 18 years later, and my journey definitely crosses paths. Tom's does. Alex, welcome. And Meighan, we're happy to have you on the Faith 180 podcast. What cool things are you up to, and what does the world need to know?
What does the world need to know? Oh my goodness, how much time do we have? I think the biggest thing that I feel like the world needs to know about ADHD and neurodivergency is just to kind of have patience with people like us. I'm going to use the pronouns us because I feel like we all kind of fall under this
Mhm.
umbrella in some capacity. And I think as the world kind of progresses, and I know there can be a lot of like negative connotations with neurodivergency of like, well, everybody is now, everyone has ADHD now. I think that the positive side of that is a lot of people are finally getting diagnosed, and a lot of people are getting to their 20s, to their 30s, getting these diagnoses and then being like, "Oh my goodness, everything just kind of clicks. This is what was going on the whole time." And I don't think that labels are necessarily always a positive thing, but I do think the positive part about that is that you're able to make sense of a lot of things, and you don't look at yourself as, this is a moral failing. If you guys have probably heard when you were growing up and going to high school, if you would just try harder, you have so much potential, but you're just not doing your best. You're lazy. If you would just be organized, if you would just do the task, everything would be okay. And the reason you're not doing the task is because there's something wrong with you in your character, that you're not trying hard enough. And I think understanding that it's something bigger than that can just give you the vocabulary to be able to understand it, and then put the tools in place to give you help that's positive. Because there's no time, I don't think, in the history of people having ADHD when someone said to them, "Can you just try harder?" And they were like, "Oh my goodness, yeah, I'll just try harder and then everything's okay."
That's
And
the answer.
it's just not how it works.
You're right. I'm fixed. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm letting out a big exhale because a lot of what you're saying is so true, and I I'm gonna make the faith connection really quickly here, but ADHD to me has so many parallels to faith in terms of the layers of it, the layers I was willing to accept at certain periods of time of ADHD. I certainly didn't seek that diagnosis out myself. Wasn't on the radar actually. It was anxiety and depression, and let's fix those things. And you're absolutely right. The language I would use is everything just started making sense, and it was consumable. Life was consumable again, and praise God for that. So if you're not diagnosed, if you're wondering, I mean, we're going to talk a lot more about it tonight, but just keep praying. And it's not easy on the surface level. I think I thought for a long time, even just, okay, well, you and my family as well, you just take the medication and everything's better. Nope. No, now you need a place to file everything. You just got a stack of files and know where to put them anymore. So that's kind of my mundane metaphor for it. So, long story short, I'm officially diagnosed and on medication. Alex and Tom are in the process of seeking it and have some information, and I'm not going to divulge their things unless they want to, but
I have no issue doing that.
I don't either. I guess even just for clarity in the podcast. I was just going to mention because, like, we've talked about another podcast that, like, I think I have ADHD and would be going for testing. I actually did end up going for testing and recently got a negative diagnosis, which I will accept for now because there is a few other mental disorders that the tests kind of revealed, like, hey, maybe you should check into this or that. So I'm satisfied with that for now. That could be, there can be other reasons for the disorganization that I have going on or the mental issues. But Tom, what were you thinking?
Well, I was sent for a diagnosis actually from my family doctor one time when I was there for something totally different. And I jokingly said something about ADHD, and he said, "Well," he goes, "I was actually gonna put in the recommendation that you get tested. Here's why." He's like, he's like, "I was sitting outside my door for like 2, 3 minutes." And he's like, and I was fully confident you were getting ready to like go in my garbage can, go through my cabinets just because you were bored, like you were fidgeting, you were doing this. So I went through my testing, which I also got a negative diagnosis for. And it's funny because I actually brought my diagnosis up on my phone before we started. You do not meet the criteria for ADHD due to the lack of evidence of childhood symptoms and or distressing or impairing symptoms at that time.
That is the exact reason that I
Right.
was not diagnosed because,
Right.
yeah, I
Because
nothing in childhood.
Right, and that's the thing, and I kinda laugh about that because, I still had all my old report cards and stuff from when I was a kid, but the thing is when I was a kid in school, my mom was a well-respected and well-liked teacher, and I had to behave, and I think some of the other teachers were scared to say negative things about me in my report cards. So, yeah, anyway, like Alex, I also will accept the diagnosis for the time being, but I have people all the time who are like, "You gotta get retested, you gotta get retested." Because when I told a group of people, "Hey, my doctor thinks I might have ADHD," they all laughed and said, "We thought you knew." Like,
So Tom,
Things
yeah,
about that, if I
yeah,
could just jump in because I'm just like, "Oh, I know all about this."
yeah.
So 2 things that can happen when you get a negative diagnosis, specifically later in life, is if you've gotten to this age and, you're in your late 30s, you've gotten really good at masking in your
As I
life.
say, you cope, you mask, yeah.
So you've developed a system of coping mechanisms so that when you test, when they're like, "Do you struggle with this?" You're like, "Well, no, because I do X, Y, crazy, all of these things." So in your mind, you're thinking, "No, I don't struggle with that." But if you did not have the system that you created, would you?
Mm,
So that's a huge part about getting tested later in life, about looking at your own masking system that you've set up.
mhm,
And then I also think, secondly, when you are a kid in school, a lot of the times it was always thought of as ADHD, especially in men, that it's always hyperactive. And inattentive ADHD is not necessarily diagnosed. And people who have inattentive ADHD are usually high anxiety. So that outward explosion that people see as hyperactive is internal and it's in your mind and that's not seen by teachers. So
Right.
they're like, it's not the kid bouncing off the walls or balancing on the back of their chair legs and falling over and, all of that stuff. It's not that kid. They're sitting quietly, but internally, they're having a complete meltdown. And then they live their life learning how to cope with that. And then by the time they get diagnosed, they're like, I have this whole system that's not going to make me show up on tests, but this entire system I've created has also destroyed my mental health as an adult.
wow, that's,
Interesting.
like,
I'm gonna
yeah,
blow your mind, Tom. There's things when you're taking that test that your mind might not even subliminally or underlyingly access or let
yeah,
you
that's
access.
true too.
I can speak to the relevancy of what she's saying because I had my doctor looked at me. Well, he didn't look at me. He was talking to my sister because I wasn't talking to him when I went in. She had to speak for me, and he looked at her and he said, "Oh, he's got the type that you can't see. It's in his head and it's all the time." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." And it was like flipping a switch completely. But Tom and Alex, there are things that I'm still accessing that I'm unlocking or working through. And that's where I think like somebody in Megan's position really comes in handy. How, as people unlock those things from childhood, now I myself have to figure out how to manage that as a 32-year-old.
Mhm.
And that's scary because everything's new again. So, Megan, how did you get into this? What obviously you did other things first. You were a teacher. So you had both of those, the outward expression and the inward expression. Could you see it back then? So I guess twofold. What led you to this? Where's the passion lie? And could you see it back then when you were teaching initially? Because for me now, I see it in everybody. Well, not everybody, but you can certainly see things that for me I used to just cope with, and I hate. I don't want to use the word hate, but I just don't like seeing it in people now because I know that there's a better version of themselves, if that makes sense. And that's one of the things about God too, about His grace, is He wants us to unlock the best version of ourselves. So, Megan, back to you. What got you into this?
So, like you said, I started as a high school teacher. I did horrible in school growing up, but at that point, it was always just looked at as like I was bad, and I had dyslexia, but that also wasn't really dealt with. And we can talk about learning disabilities and ADHD as well, which are usually coincide. So I really struggled, and I didn't go to university until I was in my late 20s. And so I went back to school when I was 28 and I loved it. And I was studying classics and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so obsessed with this. And I didn't realize what a hyperfocus was at the time, but I was like killing school. I'm like, why am I so good at this? But why can't I think about anything else? And in doing that, I was like, I actually like school again. I think I'll become a teacher because learning is actually really fun. For the first time in my life, I realized that. So I went through 6 years of school, or I did it in 5. I did the undergrad and then teacher's college afterwards. And as soon as I started teaching, I was like, oh my goodness, I can't sit at my desk. I'm going crazy. Because in university, and this is one thing that I find very interesting about high school and university, is when you're in high school or just like grade school, you're in a desk, 35 hours a day. When you're in university, even if you take 5 classes at 3 hours a class, you're in a desk 15 hours a day. It's significantly less class time and sitting, which makes the university a lot easier. So I started teaching, and all of a sudden I just started seeing all these kids. I'm like, man, they remind me of when I was in high school. And you kind of get to know these kids, and then you get they're called IEPs here. No, IEPs. There's a different acronym for every province, but essentially they're an individualized education plan for kids who have some sort of diagnosis, whether it be autism or what have you. And all these kids, I'm like, they're like me. I'm like looking at them. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're all diagnosed. They're all diagnosed. And what I do kind of started really organically, where I would have a kid with ADHD in my class at lunch being like, how do I do this? Or a kid with dyslexia being like, hey, I don't know how to do this. So I started like writing up little write-ups of like, this is how you do English class when you have a learning disability, or this is how you do this when you have ADHD. So all these different things. And it just kind of happened very naturally. And then the advocacy part of what I do, which I love so much, was just when kids started being like, can you talk to this teacher for me because they don't understand? Can you sit in on this meeting with my parents and the principal because they don't understand how my brain works and for some reason you do? And I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I'm like, yeah, this just feels very natural to me. And then after a year of teaching, I couldn't personally teach anymore. I couldn't lesson plan. I couldn't sit at my desk. I couldn't do all those things that I couldn't do at 13. I was 33 at the time. And then I started doing this, and how that kind of came about was I started working at a tutoring company, and I started with this one kid, and they were like, he had really bad ADHD and really bad dyslexia. And they're like, he's gone through everybody here and no one can help him. You want to take a crack at it? And I was like, heck yes, I do. And then it just kind of got the ball rolling from there. They'd be like, do you want to take another kid? Do you want to take another kid? And then someone would be like, oh, I know somebody who's like that. Do you think you could help them? And then over these last 3 years now, it's kind of, Tom, you said I tried to look you up to see what I could find out about you. It's all been like word of mouth. I have a half-finished website, which that's my own ADHD issues, why that's not done. But I've been fortunate and blessed enough that it's all kind of been through word of mouth and just, I guess, God just bringing these people into my life who are just like, can you help this person? And I'm like, yes, I can, because I know how their brain works, and kind of coming at it from a place of like, what did I need when I was growing up? What did I need in school? And trying to give that to every client that I have.
First of all, I think it's incredible that you identified individuals that you yourself saw yourself in. It was just like, man, if I had, like, if I would have had some knowledge or someone who looking out for me, and that's kind of what unlocked your passion for this, like, that's awesome. And second of all, the fact that you can, relate to them and, just kind of, guide them on the way. Like, it's awesome. Like, it's awesome that you see yourself in them and that's your passion.
Can I ask a question here, actually?
No.
I guess a little bit too. So, like, obviously through what you've been saying then, so you yourself have ADHD as well. I'm assuming you've gone through the diagnosis at this point. I wanted to ask this because I feel like, we're 3 guys who host this podcast. What are some of the difficulties for a female trying to get an ADHD diagnosis? Because I know in healthcare in general, there is a vast lacking in women's health, right? So how does that affect an ADHD person?
I mean, this was a bigger trend probably in the early 2000s, where women with ADHD will get diagnosed with bipolar, usually right out of the gate, because you have that higher emotional dysregulation. So that's a big thing. Also, women are less hyperactive. So 9 times out of 10, they're going to be high anxiety and have that internal kind of hyperactivity that Jordan was talking about. That's usually how it manifests with girls. And it's also more difficult for teachers to notice, because women are much better at following the rules, just the way our society is set up. They're taught to be more obedient, more submissive. So when you're in a school setting, they're not going to act out as much. So they're going to pass under the radar. They're not going to break the rules. They're not going to do those things. I think it is getting a little bit easier now because there's a lot more education around women and ADHD. The first year that I was doing this, I would say 80% of my caseload was boys between like 15 and 17. Now, I would say 90% of my caseload is girls, mostly because there's a huge gap to help girls or like girls, young women. But I've definitely noticed there's a lot more girls coming into this space looking for help than there was even 3 years ago. And I think crediting social media for that, as much as it can be like absolute poison, I think there's like a lot of positive things in that where like women are sharing their stories on TikTok or Instagram or whatever. And they're just like, this is what my life is like. And other women are like, yeah, that's me too, me too, me too. Like what's going on here? So I think just more awareness where women aren't taken as seriously, I don't think, because they're able to cover it a little bit better and they don't have those crazy outbursts in hyperactivity, especially in the younger grades as boys do.
That's really interesting because that's something like, I think I said off camera here, but like my wife, almost for certain, I could say she has ADHD. She's never been tested, but she'll like, the way I kind of begin to understand how her mind's thinking and how I can help her in situations is she'll show me a TikTok of someone saying how ADHD affects them. And she's like, this is what's happening in my brain all the time. And I'm like, that's not possible. She's like, no, this is, and I'm like, oh. And that's kind of how I've started to learn a bit more about ADHD. Because again, like growing up, and my parents would have had the same thought. It's like, oh, it's young boys and sometimes young girls who can't sit still, right? But like, she's, she's been in a very, I don't want to say strict household, but, her family was good at like, having a standard kind of thing. And like her brother did have ADHD, so he was bouncing off the walls a little bit more. And she may have had it, but she was probably better being the older sibling, even of like, no, I have to keep this under control for mom. I have to, for dad too, there was just different family things going on. So now it's all in her head. If she does indeed have it, like she's thinking 24/7, she'll be up at 3 a.m. because she's like, I can't stop thinking about what I need to do tomorrow, but I'm going to be too tired to do it now kind of thing, right? So that's interesting how social media is like that double-edged sword, right? Like,
I was
definitely
just
helping a lot of people.
I was just about to say it's helping people. Do you also feel that it's also kind of I'm trying to think of how to even ask this question. It's because I think we had said even before we started recording, like saying, "Oh, I'm autistic," or "Oh, it's just my ADHD," has just become part of the vernacular now. Now, is that like is that acceptance or is that kind of mocking? Like what's your thoughts on that? Like, do you think it's equally helping as well as devaluing, or is it more one side or the other?
Well, I think, and this kind of comes back to also like overdiagnosing and things like that and all of that. It's like everyone has a certain amount of ADHD symptoms. Sometimes we struggle to pay attention. Sometimes we struggle to sit still. Where it starts to be something that you would pathologize is when those symptoms start to affect your quality of life. So I think using it as there's sometimes in my life when there are things that I'm like, I'm doing this because of my ADHD, but I have learned enough skills that I could mitigate what's going on. And there's sometimes where I can't. So I think that's like, there has to still be an amount of personal accountability of like being like, oh, it's just my ADHD or it's just that. But there's also understanding sometimes where I think Alex was talking about his wife and her sensory issues, where it's like, I can go in a crowd and be like, yes, I can sit still and I can get through this. But if the line in my socks is touching my toe in a weird way, I'm probably going to start crying, even though I'm a grown woman and know that it's not appropriate. Do I know when this is going to happen? No, not usually. But so there are some times where you're going to sound crazy and you're going to have to be like, no, this is my ADHD. But we try our best and that's all we can do.
I was laughing just because the other day I had to take my sock off 3 times because I didn't like how my sock was sitting on my 4th toe.
It's a real thing.
I literally do that sometimes. Like your sock gets like messed up in your boot at work, and like I literally like, no, I'm an actor. I'm going to pretend it doesn't bother me, and I can't stop thinking about it. I'm like, no, I literally need to chop off my foot right now, or else this is going to drive me crazy.
So step one in this is really identification, being able to identify this, and through God's grace and mercy, he helped me find a diagnosis. And quite honestly, I didn't say this in the intro, but I rounded a corner in that coffee shop, and friend of mine and Megan's mentioned this podcast, and that struck up the further conversation about mental health and ADHD and Jesus and all that. So out of identifying it, which I think is very important, and the crazy thing is it presents itself in so many different ways, outwardly, inwardly. I can relate to everything you're saying, Alex, just in terms of mental capacity. But in my case, I had learned to cope for 15 years, and coping became, I guess, well, I don't know. My doctor looked at me and said, I guess we missed it for 15 years. And I was like, oh, well, that's reassuring. But out of identifying, Megan, what do you think, like, how can we help people that are listening to this right now identify if they have it? Are there any like alarms that should be going off? And this is not to scare anybody, because for me, I didn't walk into a diagnosis willingly. I was brought in through denial, and that's okay. If like this is not like saying, "Oh, call this number right now." No. How can people identify it? And then is there anywhere you recommend they start? And then beyond that, I would just want to move on to like the management part of it. Once we've identified, I think it's important to manage and help that side of it. So, how can we help anybody listening to this who might be thinking right now, oh, well, what if this? Like, it's not the end of the world. First of all, take a deep breath. The good news is you're curious and you want to investigate. And a starting point is better than no point at all.
I think that like some of the major red flags that you start to notice in your life, especially how they affect your quality of life, is especially if you're older, for example, starting to look at patterns in your life. Have I not been able to hold a job for very long? Do I have short-lived friendships and I hop around from friend groups often? Do I move often? Looking for passive consistency in your life. And if you struggle with that, that could be an indication. And that's more of like the macro way, when you're kind of like looking at your life and like, why is my life looking different than someone else's? Because people with ADHD tend to hit those milestones later in life, the maybe getting married, having a family, those sorts of things, because it takes us a little longer to grow up and figure things out. So that can be a big one if you're looking for a later in life diagnosis. On a more micro level, certain things that will kind of stick out, I think, is, do you have trouble like preparing food, grocery shopping, those sorts of things? And that stems from, and this is where executive function coaching, the name, comes from. It's your ability to practice executive function. What do I need to do? What's the most important thing? How do I put it in order? And how do I execute it? So that could come from your wife telling you, I need you to go to the store, buy this and this and this, stop by the gas station on the way home and do this. They tell it to you completely orally. Your brain shuts down and you look at them like, what did you just say? So if that happens, Tom's laughing.
See, I'm on the other side of that now, and you describing that is like, I need every detail and I will do it exactly how you say it now, as opposed to I used to be on the other side of it. And to your other point about like on the bigger level, the macro level, I had forgotten about those things because I've been in the nitty gritty right now. I've been working on the macro level, the micro level. So I forgot about like the three biggest things, which was like employment, moving, and friends. He just like completely forgot that those were issues of mine pre-ADHD diagnosis.
No, I'm laughing because every time I'm sent grocery shopping, I have to get a list, but I need it in the exact order in which I would walk through the store. So
I
it's like,
get
okay,
that. Yeah.
walk in, and it's like
That
I
just means you love me.
right. So like I need to go in. It's like, okay, here's produce, and then it's dairy, and then it's whatever. Like I can't have a list that's not in that
Well,
order.
there's nothing worse than being in the pharmacy.
Hours.
You're in the pharmacy and then strawberries, toothpaste, strawberries.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a mild the other way.
But no, I need
Here we
literally
go. Our ADHD is
Yeah.
taking this off the rails again.
I need everything I'm sent to town to do in a list, or I'm gonna forget it. Like,
I mean,
Mhm. So
not
that would
hearing
affect adults, and that would also kind of, if you're worried if your child has ADHD, it so much lies in an inability to understand instructions. So that's what usually gets diagnosed in school because you're given lists of here's a task, follow these instructions. Your teacher tells you 10 things in a row, you don't understand, your child's not paying attention. Those are usually the first thing that you
Right.
see that in adult life
Not
too.
bad kid. They just learn different.
right.
Yeah, exactly. Or you said the first instruction and they were like, "Yeah, and you lost me after that." Like, I'll still do that even as an adult. So, and that's why you get the bad behavior. They're not listening, they're not paying attention. You give them something to read that has 10 instructions. They can't read it, they don't know what's going on. They start bugging their neighbor because it's much better to get in trouble for being bad than to get in trouble for being stupid because you don't understand and ask for help. And then the teacher go, I just explained this to the entire class. I'm not going to explain it to you. And you're like, cool, I'm never going to ask for help ever again. And then that becomes a pattern later in life. It can also lead to like a deep fear of authority later, which will affect your jobs and your inability to express your needs later in life. School trauma is real for neurodivergent kids. So all of these things, whether you're dealing with a child that you might suspect or you're an adult, look at how you deal with instructions and there will be a lot of keys there.
See, I didn't used to know that there was two like ADHDs, and the kids with the other kind would drive me crazy because I'd be sitting there lost in my thoughts and then they would be doing something distracting and we were just fighting the same battle the whole time. So I think that's incredible. So in terms of management, because that's really, I mean, in terms of an executive function coach, what like where do you start? What is the soft landing? Is there an aggressive approach? And then a third question, is there any clinic, maybe you don't know this, but is there any clinical like research into how we can identify or help people with earlier diagnosis and it not reaching a point? Because there's the reality that I could have missed a diagnosis at 32 and then 50 with a plethora of bigger problems in my life. So where does the management begin if people want that support?
So usually the management, so if I got a new client, and I'm just going to use for the sake of this example, someone who's an adult, even university level, because ADHD isn't a one size fits all. So people are going to be struggling specifically with different things. There are two ways to kind of approach this from the beginning. It's physical organization and then also like event life organization. So sometimes it can start with your room or your house might be a disaster. And that's where we have to start. And we have to start putting in some sort of physical organization. So if we start with that, people with ADHD struggle with something called object permanence. If you put food in your fridge, if you put things in your closet, if you put things in a drawer, they don't exist. So things have to be constantly in your line of sight, but that leads to mess. So how can you keep things constantly in your line of sight but keep them organized? So trays and bins will save your life. This is like very much in the weeds, but it's like don't put food in your fridge or your cupboard that you want to eat. Put it in a bin on your counter. It'll go bad and you'll lose money. Like I've had to throw out so much food in my life. I don't even put stuff away anymore. As far as clothes go, clear bins. Don't use drawers. You need to be able to see your stuff. If you don't see it, it doesn't exist. So it'll either be in a closet and it doesn't exist, or it will be all over the floor so you know it does. Put it in a way that looks neat, but you can still see it at all times. So that's very helpful for physical management.
Everything she's saying is true. 100%. I have reduced my clothes since I've been on medication down to like I want to know I have 2 pairs of jeans and 5 t-shirts and that's all I need.
So
And I gave the rest away.
I'm laughing because we just threw out like 4 packages of like lunch meat, and Jess was like, "Why didn't you eat it?" I'm like, "I forgot we had it." Like, and I literally have 3. I shouldn't out myself like this,
But
but I
to that point, that's one of the big things for me is the saying that's been stuck in my head for the last 3 months.
Yeah.
You don't know what you need
Yeah,
if you don't know what you have.
right.
And
It's true. But
I was swimming in so much have that I didn't even know what I needed.
I,
And now I'm
I,
the opposite.
I have 3 drawers of t-shirts because I forgot I have them. and and again, I'm really embarrassed to show this, but the room I'm recording in right now.
Yeah.
What's that? Take the test again. The
Take
room
the
I'm
test.
recording in right now, I know Jessica will be mortified knowing I'm showing you guys this. I'm I've been saying for the last year I'm gonna clean it, but like, look at this mess.
I would like to point out the mess behind my camera is not my mess. I'm really not. This is not my room.
Look at this mess. Like
Fellas,
To rip off a quote from like a commenter on TikTok, I'm sure it's been used before. With what you've just been saying, Megan, I've never been so seen yet so berated in my entire life. Like you saying like, "Oh yeah, make sure the bins or you need bins to put stuff." And I'm thinking like, that's why my wife wants to buy a new tote bag every time we go to Starbucks or a coffee shop. That's why I don't remember.
well,
Like you
okay.
said, I have these shirts because I lost them in some laundry basket.
Truthfully, I had to stop and write this down while we were talking, but I think this conversation is gonna be more helpful to a lot of people than I think any of us maybe realize. Maybe Megan does just from the standpoint of being in the coaching perspective, but like to your point, Alex, understanding the ADHD in the other person, like just and my wife, God bless her, was reading books about it to understand me, and she's still trying to help me become better every day, and it's unseen, right? You can't see it, and her and I have had this conversation, and this isn't a pity conversation, but I've said to her, if I was an amputee or if I had some sort of physical, just something that appeared, but because it's the brain, there's no empathy, and I'm not asking for it, but all I'm suggesting is when she can understand me, our relationship has become a lot better. Let me say that. And it's it's been super eventful. Yeah. Talking about it is okay. People are
that's
gonna
it.
find healing from talking about it.
Yeah, and that's it too. I mean, because there's been such a stigma around anything mentally over the last, I remember being a kid, there was such a stigma talking about it, and it's really only been the last couple of years that people have even been open to talking about depression and everything and everything that goes with it, autism, ADHD, like everything. Like it's
Well,
stigma
I didn't
slowly going away, but it needs to go away faster.
Tom, read the text you sent earlier because it's how she started this conversation. And that's why I was smiling earlier. You were talking about about high school or something. It just wasn't allowed.
Yeah.
It's not lost on me that there's a lot of people in their 30s and 40s right now finding out they have ADHD. Surprise. It's okay though. And man, the progress you can make just in getting things done, but managing the time and separating it into appropriateness and identifying that there's a time for family. You can't, for me, I'll say it. One of my coping things was, when I'd come home, I'd be depressed. So I wouldn't come home. I'd stay at work longer. 6 o'clock would turn to 7 to 8 o'clock. And for a long time, I just convinced myself that, okay, well, if I worked harder, I'd have more merit and the success would make up for my lack of presence. And the whole time, people just wanted me to come home. And I'm saying this honestly because the realization for me was like, oh man, I'm doing X because I really don't like Y. And I'm justifying X over here. It's okay.
And I think like that depression and like those sorts of things can very much stem from having an ADHD diagnosis later in life. Because if you think that it's something that's wrong with you, like, and you're talking about, if I just output more at work, I'm going to create more value for myself and then I'm not going to feel depressed. And low self-esteem with people with ADHD, especially when they're diagnosed later in life, is so prevalent because you're in a system that's not set up to work for you, specifically when you're in elementary school, junior high, and high school. And I will say this for any parents who are listening who their kids are in high school or in school in general, that is the hardest thing they will ever do in their life is school. That's the hardest part. That's the hardest structure. Once you get out, you have this wonderful opportunity where you have to stop trying to change yourself to fit the system, where you get this amazing opportunity to create a system that fits yourself. And that's what I think the focus should be on people with ADHD, is not trying to be like, let's make you really good at school. Let's get you a tutor. Let's teach you how to sit still. Let's, do all of these different things to make you really good at school or in that environment. But what if we foster the interests that you had, where, because people with ADHD are incredibly passionate, extremely creative, and are amazing at hyper-focusing. They're amazing entrepreneurs, salespeople, all of these things. What if we fostered those skills instead, leaned into what they were good at, and let them create these wonderful lives for themselves instead of beating them down for the first 25 years and then wondering why they feel like complete crap about themselves and can't stick with a career, have trouble in relationships, and all of these things. But we just let them flourish from jump. And I think that that's a better approach in an ideal world. But even just knowing that, it's like when you're in school, it's like, this isn't going to end. Once you're out, you're going to have more freedom to just be yourself, drop the mask, and create a life for yourself that works for you, which I think I've been so fortunate in what I do, where since I've stopped teaching, I feel way less ADHD than I did when I had to sit in a classroom all day long and sit in a desk. And I don't notice those things as much because, all I do is talk to people with ADHD all day long. Most of my friends are ADHD. My boyfriend's ADHD. I live in neurodivergent land all the time. So I have that privilege to really lean into it. But I think that if you're able to do that, and it's going to affect that self-esteem aspect and really lean into the positive parts of ADHD, which I think people should know about too, because it's not all letting lunch meat go bad in your fridge all the time and not knowing what to do at the grocery store. There's some really, really cool things about having a brain that works a little bit differently.
You're unlocking some things for me, but I'm just thinking how easy it was to mask ADHD with merit in elementary and junior high. I was a 98% student. I went to the top academic high school in Canada, and then boom, I got hit for the fifth time, my fifth concussion, and what seemed to be an underlying condition started to present itself. And listen, folks, I am 31 and 32 and only realized this a few weeks ago. So you can go a long time before it was like, okay, I had it. I masked it with high function elite sports. I played sports with your brother and great marks, and I took that to high school, and then I couldn't do it anymore. And I can remember now looking back, it was like 16, 17 when I couldn't do school anymore. School got hard, and it was just a matter of things bubbling up from underneath underlying things. So it's okay if you've missed this, or if you're listening to this and going, "Oh no," like, no, 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 no. Again, the best place to start is somewhere, and that's why we're having this conversation. So, further into management, Megan, like what are your passions in, I don't want to say coping space because that's a bad word, but what are things that are practical in your life that might help people listening right now, just in terms of daily life? I know for me, like a struggle was getting out of bed. It was morning, and I'll be honest about it because I think there's a lot of other people like me who can't get out of bed, and it's looked at as sometimes laziness. For me, it wasn't. I was scared to get out of bed, and that's all right. So, like, what are some daily things that might help people listening?
I think with like the motivation of getting out of bed, that can be a really, really difficult thing for people with ADHD too. There's a few factors in that. People with ADHD tend to stay up really late. Our brains come alive at night. We're very productive between about 10 and 2 a.m. It's a really good time for us. So if you have to wake up then at 7 o'clock in the morning, there is that element of being exhausted. That can be hard, where we just don't wake up early, which also is hard when you're in school and you have to be on at 8 a.m. We tend to wake up, afternoon time. But I think if it's a combination of not wanting to get up because there's elements of depression going on as well, doing something you're good at right away. And that usually in ADHD will pertain to a hyperfocus. So just for people who are listening who don't understand what a hyperfocus is, it's when we all have interests, but when you have ADHD and you get an interest, it's like, I can't stop. It becomes compulsive and it becomes your thing, and you can rattle off a million facts about it, and it's a high interest area. But what happens is, and why we get so addicted, is because people with ADHD are low dopamine, and a hyperfocus makes you mainline dopamine. And it feels awesome because you're just like, I'm getting a really feel good drug. So engaging in your hyperfocus, something you're good at, they usually go hand in hand, when you wake up is going to give you a shot of dopamine, and it's going to get you out of bed. So that can be really helpful, whether it's even, and I know people say don't grab for your phone right away, but if you're doing it to get the dopamine in your hyperfocus because you're struggling to wake up in the morning, that can be helpful. So it's like maybe a celebrity you're really into, a sports team or whatever, something that's going to jolt that will give you a little bit more energy to get out of bed.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one too there. Sorry, I was just gonna say, like in high school, how I had a Wizards of Waverly Place only Selena Gomez calendar beside my bed. That's kind of like in the morning I would like wake up, kiss the calendar, and then, be on my merry way. That's
Yes, you got your dopamine and you were awake. That's amazing. I love that.
You're listening to Confessions with Alice Gabriel.
okay.
But
Well,
that's short term. Like, you do want to start to develop a good nighttime and a good morning routine. That's very, very, very helpful. And that's more like long term. If I was working with you like as a coach, that's something we would work on, and that would take a few months to get something good. But if you're just like, I need to wake up tomorrow and I need something immediate, that's going to be an immediate solution for that.
I just have a quick observation here. You had brought up that, like, people with ADHD really come alive like at 10 o'clock, and that's when they do their best work, and that's whenever. And I didn't realize that was a common trait amongst people with ADHD. And I'm wondering, and I'm just spitballing here, and this is just a thought I had, is it because at that late at night, all other social structure is essentially over, and now people with ADHD feel that they can actually do what they want to do?
I think there's an element of that. I think there's like part of it's like I think we just have a different circadian rhythm. But I
Okay.
also think, especially with the clients who I work with who are highly creative, I have one client and she paints. She's a phenomenal painter, but she's like, I can't start painting until everyone else in my house is in bed and I can make a mess and I can get into it. So she's like, I can't do it on school nights because I'll go until like 3, 4 in the morning. But I think there is something about that quietness and the lack of structure and your ability to create your own structure where you're on your own time. And I think that can be very helpful for you stop masking. That's a
Yeah.
huge part of it too. So yeah.
Yeah, because I know me, like, some nights I'll stay up way too late, and it's because I'm, hyper focusing on something, going down rabbit holes or what have you. And that's because, like I said, my son's asleep, my wife's asleep, and it's like I feel I can just do it. And I also know if I go to sleep, that means tomorrow comes, which means structure comes again. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's why I know I do it. I just didn't know it was a common.
You have a lot of coping mechanisms, Tom. Have you ever considered getting diagnosed for ADHD?
Maybe I should do it again.
Tom. Oh
wanted to make a
man.
joke here that you should just pray more, but I think that's a little like, I mean, shoot, that's what some people say. And like, don't get me wrong, prayer is a good answer, but like, Jesus made meds and people who are smart enough to understand this ADHD
Yeah,
stuff too,
so
right?
truth moment. My lack of diagnosis kept me from accessing God because I couldn't ever put the pieces together, but there was always something other than God that became the thing. For me, it was like success and merit, and I hear this so often on podcasts nowadays, but the conversation about, well, once I get there, then this will happen, and then this will happen. And for me, it was like, okay, I can live healthy and happy now. I can live with God now. I don't have to get to a successful point for God to look at me and say, okay, you made it, man. Megan, do you relate to that at all? Like, I really started to develop my relationship with Jesus once I was able to understand the layers of things I had built to just make me feel better at the end of the day.
I think that there's definitely elements of how ADHD affects your walk in positive and negative ways. I think that sometimes when we're doing things, we can look at it as, God just like help me to change this part. Like maybe I'm not being as an attentive partner or different things like that, or I'm scattered, I'm organized in my home life. And you're praying to God to like help you be a better father, husband, whatever. And that might not be the right issue in the way that you're handling it, where you could be approaching it as like, God, send me a really good mental health professional to help me with this. And I also think that there are different aspects of, even if you have ADHD, praying can be really hard. It can be incredibly difficult
Mhm.
sit and focus. I struggle with that. I can't pray unless I'm writing. I have to write it, or else, because just being like, I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm like, in 30 seconds, I'm not at all. So there is that element. But I also think that because we are so easily excitable, which is one of the best parts, having passion and fire in your relationship with God can be so easy to access. And I don't know if this is a weird thing. There's can be so much dopamine in your faith that can really make those
Yeah, no,
feelings
that's true.
much more visceral. So I think that being able to access that and that excitability and that passion comes so much more naturally to us. So there is that layer that I think is where ADHD is a bit more of a bonus, especially with creativity. And I'm just thinking, Jordan, like when you're leading worship at church and things like that, like and that's not to say people with ADHD are not as passionate as you, but you're so into it. And I think that that's because you're able to just access that passion so easily and so readily. So I think that there is very positive elements that can help with your walk, even if there are certain things that can
Mm.
deter it at times.
So
But it's positive.
that's an interesting thing to bring up, because, and I probably don't talk about this stuff, but it's because I don't know, I don't talk about it. It's me and God stuff, but that got easier after diagnosis and proper medication. Not easier, but it had more meaning. For a lot of time, I was searching in a lot of the worship. I couldn't like individually identify things that were happening. So you could look out into a room and see a full room, but you couldn't single out anybody. I can definitely attest that, yeah, it has gotten easier with the diagnosis and the medication, and praise God for that. Not again, not easier. It's just like I can now discern things. Part of that role, if you read into it, and it's just discerning it and speaking to a large room, discerning, reading language, understanding the room. And it was a job to do that previous, and now it's a lot easier to put things into silos. And for me, like you're talking about tips earlier, for me, I've now been able to put things into silos. Jesus and faith, family, community, and then I just look at those areas and kind of discern from there where to put my time, energy, focus, and but it's the management of it. So we've talked about identifying, management. Where do we go from here? What is a long-term forecast for people that are dealing with this? And there is hope. So that's what I want to talk about. What is the outlook? How can this be helpful?
Well, I think that when it comes to getting diagnosed, so the first thing is a lot of people do want to seek that diagnosis, which I think is important. If you don't want to go on medication, you don't necessarily need to get a diagnosis. I will say that. If your end goal is to not become medicated, I wouldn't make that diagnosis and trying to access that, because it is difficult, especially in Nova Scotia, at the forefront. If you do want to go on medication and you really need that diagnosis, there's a website called Beyond ADHD, which is very, very helpful at getting you diagnosed quickly and cost effectively. There's not much of a wait, and it's much cheaper. So those are the two big things. And then as far as hope and how do we live with this, I think the big thing is identifying the positives. And I think building back up your confidence after living a life with ADHD is the first and biggest step. Because especially if you're at this age and you've gone through the school system, your confidence is going to be pretty low, and you're not going to think that you're good at things. So doing an inventory of what are you good at and what am I naturally good at? What comes natural to me? What feels good when I'm doing it? Those sorts of things. Because the best thing you can do, and I know that not everyone has the opportunity to completely change their career, But there are little ways that you can start incorporating things that you're good at, things that don't feel like a struggle, because that is one of the hardest parts about ADHD is things that aren't a struggle for someone who's neurotypical are going to be a struggle for you. And then that can lead to you feeling ineffective. So what comes easy? Figuring out what's easy. I think that's the best place to start with yourself. And then implementing systems. So the physical organization system that we talked about with putting things in your line of sight, super important for just being in an organized space. Secondly, especially if you have a family and you have kids and you have lots of schedules, it can be hard to navigate an online calendar system. So in the beginning, just getting a big whiteboard, putting it where everyone can see it, and writing important stuff on it. People's schedules, things that need to be remembered in your line of sight, and having that external memory. Because that's also one thing that we do struggle with is just like, oh, I'll remember that, and you won't. Or I'll write it down. I'll put it in the notes app of my phone. I close the notes app, then it doesn't exist anymore. So keeping things always in your line of sight. And I think that's an important thing to remember. So if you have to put something away, if you need to remember something, if anything that's important, you have to see it. And that can encompass appointments, schedules, clothing, groceries, whatever. And that's a good way to organize your phone or your home. So there's that piece of like getting into the nitty-gritty of how to make things a little bit more manageable. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of it is just like giving yourself an unbelievable amount of grace and not being afraid to ask it of other people. Of when you're struggling, of if someone tells you to do 10 things. My favorite thing to tell clients, especially ones who are in school, it's like, tell me one step at a time, one instruction at a time. Or if you don't understand something that someone's trying to explain to you, can you explain it to me in another way? And then getting the people around you comfortable with learning your brain and finding out what you need. And, this is something that I struggle with. I'm always going to leave X, Y, and Z on the counter. Can this not be a big deal? This is an area that I'm struggling with because of my ADHD. Let's not fight about this. And communicating your needs to the people in your life, in your home, step one. Whether you want to do that at work, that can be another scary step. But not being afraid to ask for what you need. But this is where understanding your own brain comes into play. Because if you go into your workplace and you say, well, I have ADHD and I need accommodations, someone's going to look at you and be like, well, what do you need? And you're like, well, I don't know. I have ADHD. I don't know what I need. So being able to say, I need something like Grammarly. I need a standing desk. I need a whatever, but learning what you need uniquely for yourself. So when you do have those conversations with the people in your life, your employers, your friends, your family, you can specifically say, this is what I need. Or if, it can be as simple as I'm meeting friends for dinner and they say in the group chat, where should we go? I don't like making decisions. That's just something I don't do. Perfect. Decide for me. That's the best thing you can do. But it's little things like that. Knowing what you need and then expressing it to the people in your life. Because you shouldn't have to change everything about yourself.
Yeah, understandable. And I latched onto something you said, Grammarly. That's what I was trying to think of before we started talking this evening. No one knows what I'm talking about, but it is Grammarly. But just the recap, yeah, like it sounds like basically what you're saying is, an ADHD diagnosis isn't a label of limitation, but strictly just a path to understanding how one's brain works. And with proper support,
Amen.
but with proper support, what some people see as limitations can actually become immense strength.
Mm-hmm.
You're just wired a little differently, and that's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. I think there's a tremendous amount of hope, and our world is set up in such a way now that there is support, and you don't have to live in a way that's causing you distress.
Mm.
You can create your own systems, and there's nothing wrong with you for not being able to be quote unquote like everybody else. It's not a bad thing.
Stop trying to ram stop trying to ram the square peg into the round hole.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It only was retroactively that I realized like how many things I did for other people, not in like I'm not saying this in a greedy way, but just the things I did to cope daily with other people and for other people. For me, that at the end of the day, I look back on and some of those things is like, why did I do that? What I like a lot of the coping would just make like the result of the coping was never a better result, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, okay, well, I'm doing X. Again, I'm back talking about the letters, but I'm doing X to get to Y, but actually Y equals a disaster. But the coping was easier, so I'm just going to do that than actually facing it head on. And once I actually just was able to identify, like, these are the things. Oh, all right. I can fix those things. It's easy. I just have to, first of all, understand them. And I'm speaking from somebody who's on the other side of it. So don't get me wrong. It's not easy at all. Understand it, identify it, manage it. I've loved this conversation.
I have too. It's been super insightful, reflective. Like you've said things I haven't even considered before. Yeah, it's been awesome.
Well, yeah, this was so much fun. I'm happy that I could be a part of it and that you guys found it helpful. So thank you for having me.
Anytime.
Any final thoughts? I mean, we don't have to rush off. Everybody can exhale. Sometimes the end banter makes its way in, and it's some of us, usually Alex yelling something.
Can you
Go,
go to your
Alex.
workplace and say that you need like mandatory collection of fidget spinners at your desk? Like, is that permissible and a good way to deal with? Like, can they be glow in the dark? Is there a better color for That's my question.
I think my favorite fidget is called an infinity cube.
Is that the one that keeps like you keep opening it? Is that the one? I love those.
$15 on Amazon.
Yeah.
Get yourself one of those.
I got
Yeah, so
this.
you unfold it and it constantly unfolds and it's a square and then a
See,
rectangle.
I told you the best info's in the credits. Stick around,
Yeah.
folks. But infinity cubes. I gave
They're-
everybody at I was the boss, but I gave everybody squishies. So,
Mhm.
like, once a month, I'd go to the dollar store and just buy 10 squishies. And for like an hour, it would just be peace and quiet of people fidgeting with these squishies.
I'm a fan of my fidget cube personally. It's 6 fidgets in one in the shape of a cube.
Okay.
I remember seeing that before fidget spinners even came out. My
Right.
friend had one and was
Yep.
like, yeah, it's good for people with ADHD. I don't even think she had it. She just would have worked with kids who had it, right? So, like,
No, I love
she
just
had one in her purse. Like,
Tom, there's no prize for the most fidgets. Okay, there's no prize for there.
One positive thing I have noticed is I've been seeing baskets of fidgets places. There's one at like the Yarmouth Museum. I was not there that long ago, and they had a basket of fidgets for kids, or like different hairdressers will have like a basket, which I think is really great because they're starting to understand. I'm like, people might need this, and I think that can be very helpful.
Jessica's a TA and she literally has like a tote bag just full of fidgets, like everything.
Well,
She calls it her kit.
It'd be very
world
helpful.
of 3D printing these days, like, I can only imagine that the fidget toy market is going to grow, you know?
Mhm.
It already is, man.
well, listen, folks. If you made
Thanks
it
for joining
joining this far, thanks for joining Faith 180.
Yes, guys. All right.
So
Sorry.
mental health meets Jesus and ADHD people. We love everybody. Listen, Meighan, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us. I can sense a part 2, and I think people are going to absolutely love this information. Tom, what do you got?
You had mentioned Beyond ADHD earlier in the episode. We'll probably put a link to that in the description. Is there any other resource websites that you can think of would be beneficial to put down there? And if you can't think of them right off the top of your head, email me a couple and I'll put them in the description when I upload.
Okay, yes, I'll need a minute to think. I'm not
Sure.
great at on the spotlight.
Sweet. Yeah, just send me a couple.
Okay.
Check the description for those.
Perfect. Well, in the dark, uncertain world, folks, be a light. We're Faith 180. Have a great night. Peace.
People can't see me, but I'm throwing up the deuces.
Guys, I just found out there's a fidget spinner for free on Google.
Faith 180 is a Christ-centered podcast devoted to making the infinite grace, glory, and mercy of Jesus more accessible to everyone, everywhere. Created, produced, and hosted by Thomas Hazelton and Jordan Hamilton. Co-hosted by Alex Abriel, and produced and edited by Justin Gaudet. Consumed by Fire's Goodbye Ol' Me from the album First Things First is used with permission. You can find the band on all streaming platforms, and social media is linked in the description below. Visit faith180.ca, follow Faith180 on Facebook, and email us at bealight@faith180.ca. In the darkness of today's world, be a light.